Hey guys, welcome back to today's video. Today is Friday, November 26th, 2021, and today we're going to be talking about the political polarization of COVID-19 and its effects on the American electorate. With my title, I'm sure that you are wondering, how do I draw this conclusion? How does COVID-19 benefit the Republican Party more than it does the Democratic Party? And to be quite honest with you, it does seem to be quite interesting. Just a year ago, I was making videos with the exact opposite conclusion, a bit over a year ago, before President Trump lost his election. And the reason for that was because of the person in power. The change ultimately comes down as a result of President Biden now being the president versus a candidate back in the 2020 presidential election. And taking a look at the numbers for President Biden in terms of how he is being viewed on COVID-19, the numbers have gotten exceptionally close. And with new news coming out of South Africa pertaining to the Omicron variant, one that is deemed more dangerous and more transmittable than Delta based off preliminary and early data signs and indications, this should worry many Democrats, politically speaking, and just general people across the nation. Now, I really try to step back and non-politicize certain events or certain parts of our standard American culture today. COVID-19 has been so ingrained in society that we expect to see increasing mask mandates or restrictions on travel or things of that nature. And while that's something that we are used to, it negatively reflects on those in power. And in this case, and for the next 3 years, that will be President Biden. You can actually see the approval rating of President Biden on handling the coronavirus has gone down tremendously. When Joe Biden entered into office, there was a margin here in which 38% more Americans approved of the way he handled COVID-19 than they disapproved of it. Today, that is narrowed down to merely 1.6%. From 38% down to 1.6%, 38% versus 1.6%, a super significant reduction. Largely because President Biden is the one that people view at fault. And the same thing happened to President Trump. I mentioned this back when we talked about the 2020 election results, in which we, discussed what were the reasons why President Trump lost the election. And for a significant portion of the election season leading up until the final results came out, I said that COVID-19 was going to be that nail in the coffin for Donald Trump. When it comes down to the way that the American public perceived his administration, most people will remember him as the administration in which COVID-19 ravaged across the nation. And while the numbers are very similar now as they were before, vaccines have gone up, and about half the nation is relatively unfazed or not really caring too much about COVID-19 because of vaccination status or because they simply do not care about the virus itself. But all around, that negatively reflects on President Biden. But back to my point about Trump, the American public was very quick to blame him and disapprove of the way that he handled the COVID-19 pandemic. Now, I'm not one to argue against this point. As I have said multiple times, I do not think it is political to ask people to wear a mask or to get vaccinated. These are two things that are helpful for the American public, and I think that they should be established as nonpartisan things and nonpartisan beliefs. But unfortunately, because of the partisanship of America, we have gone to a point where there's a Democrat and Republican stance on masking, on social distancing, on lockdowns, on mandates, on vaccines. The list goes on. You can extend it way beyond COVID-19, and this isn't new to COVID-19, but it is unfortunate that a pandemic still can't unite the country as a whole. And you can see this with President Trump. So even leading up to his day of the election, Donald Trump was disapproved of by nearly 20 points more Americans than he was approved of, which meant that voters here were clearly upset, discontent with President Trump's handling of the virus itself. And now they are beginning to turn on President Biden. It went from being 38 points in the advantage down to 1.6%. Quite embarrassing, if you ask me. So how does this help the Republican Party? Well, I'm sure you can already tell that the approval rating of Biden continuing to go down will only benefit the GOP. And that makes sense. The Republican Party benefits when Biden is unpopular. That's just how standard political networking, or not necessarily networking, approval ratings work, how they impact certain political party advantages across the nation. So they obviously benefit with the American public moving further and further down. But with the surge of these new variants, the Omicron variant in specific, That's what the main point of this video is, specific to this variant, in a very similar fashion to the Delta variant, in which I actually did not cover too heavily on this channel, even though it absolutely held major political implications, even though we failed to recognize that and still don't talk about it much. But we can talk about it here, and we can pretty much see it, and we'll see it over the next coming months if the Omicron variant ends up on U.S. borders, as we can expect with a 99% certainty. But that's not to scare you or faze you. That's just saying that the American public is likely going to face this new variant, and we will see what the World Health Organization comes out with information on it, what the CDC comes out with information on it. All around here, though, we don't know much about the variant other than the fact that it could very well be the next dominant strain, which typically occurs with many variants. So, looking at the COVID strain, the Omicron variant, how does this help the GOP? And again, I hate to say this as a means of politicizing a brand new variant for COVID-19, but we have to completely acknowledge that the state of our nation will 100% benefit from COVID-19 moving across the nation, specifically because of these previous mask mandates. Taking a look at our current map, there actually aren't that many states with mask mandates, and I don't think so coincidentally, but all of the states with any type of mask mandate all voted for both Hillary Clinton and Joe Biden. And you can see this across the nation. Taking a look at the map here, you have New Mexico, Washington, D.C., and the state of Hawaii. Taking a look at that, every single one of those states, ranging from the East Coast to the West Coast, all voted for Hillary Clinton and Joe Biden in 2016 and 2020. I don't think that's much of a coincidence. But think about how you might feel from someone who has not had a mask mandate lifted. Now, in Maryland, I cannot agree with sort of that understanding. Looking at the mask mandates in my next home state of Massachusetts, or current home state, both Maryland and Massachusetts, it really comes down to a county and citywide call for masks altogether, but there is no statewide mandate. But if you're coming from the perspective of someone, for instance, who comes from Oregon or Washington, where you have experienced a mask mandate for a significant period of time with maybe 1 month of leisure outdoors at that with many of these mandates, or California, where you have seen a mask mandate for many people across the state that has lasted throughout the entirety of the pandemic, even during the time frame in which we thought we were actually beating this virus. If you are entering into the next midterm cycle under brand new leadership, under a Democratic trifecta, under the guise and promise from these Democrats that they were going to solve COVID-19, as one of Biden's main promises on PolitiFact's website is his number one out of his top 5 promises to get COVID-19 under control. Saying, quote, "I'm never going to raise the white flag and surrender. We're going to beat this virus. We're going to get it under control. I promise you." And yet, what has happened? A surge of new variants across the nation. A resurgence of COVID-19 in highly vaccinated areas as well, because these new variants are becoming more transmissible and more resistant to vaccines, to antibodies, to natural antibodies or vaccine antibodies, whatever it might be. Altogether, this COVID strain, or whichever one ends up popping up, will ultimately show that sometimes you can still get COVID-19 even with the vaccine. Obviously, it's a decreased level. But if you are still under restrictions, you might be saying, maybe it's time for new leadership. While the virus may have broken out under President Trump, that obviously wasn't his fault per se. He didn't cause the virus, but there is a lot of questioning there about whether or not he is at fault for what happened with the spread and the sudden surge across the nation and the super spreader rallies that he held, whatever it might be. But altogether, people will be under 2 years of a Democratic trifecta. And if COVID-19 continues to destroy this nation in its highly risked areas, in its highly dense areas where Democratic support is at a very big high there, altogether you will have voters who will resent the Democratic Party, even though this may not be their fault. They were following the rules, they wore a mask the entire time, they got vaccinated, got their booster shot, and yet these mask mandates, these restrictions remain. And while a good portion of those Democratic voters will acknowledge this is science, this makes sense. A good portion of them will also say, yes, while it is science, COVID isn't going to affect me as much as my next unvaccinated individual that I pass by. They may be impacted by COVID-19 negatively, but I won't. So why should I have to wear a mask? Why should I have to take precautions when people who don't even care about the virus, who are more at risk, don't even take precautions anyway? And that's the questioning that will be thrown back and forth between Democrats as they enter into the midterm elections, and this Omicron variant will only add to it. Because Biden is now falling out of favor, if it continues to get worse across the nation, and I'm telling you right now, that is a very real reality as we get into the holiday season, people are going to begin to look to someone to blame them for this COVID-19 resurgence. They are going to want to say, Joe Biden brought us down immediately after entering into office, and that was 100% true. Right after Joe Biden was entered into office, we continued down this downward phase, and then it became lower and lower and lower until we actually hit a bit of a sweet spot. I don't know if you remember this, but this was May and June, back in the summertime before the Delta variant came around the country and was becoming the dominant strain across the nation. But we had an average of around 11,000 cases per day. What an amazing time. Today, that number stands at nearly 100,000 cases per day, and it actually hit a very high point with 164,000 cases per day right at the end of summer as people were going into universities. And I think that this is something that ultimately shows there is a significant resurgence possibility for COVID-19. Even at this point in time, the American public had a very similar vaccination rate as they do now. And while many states are trying to encourage more and more people to get vaccinated, you can still see that the number remains pretty high. I mean, if we were to map this relative to last year, this would be one of the higher points throughout the entirety of the year. Even summer last year, before any vaccines were distributed, the COVID-19 numbers were not even as high. And that's the unfortunate reality for President Biden, that even under his leadership, even under a Democratic trifecta, even under what seems to be outwardly facing Democratic control, Democratic, pushes and orders and executive orders from Biden's desk, ensuring a mask mandate on government property, whatever it might be, he is the one who is going to take the heat for this because he's taking all of these precautions, or some people might say isn't taking enough precautions. No matter what, this negatively reflects on President Biden, just as it did on President Trump in the 2020 election. And it also will make it difficult for Democrats in 2022. Let's take a look at this vaccination map. Again, like I had mentioned before, the vaccinated people will not experience COVID-19 the same way that unvaccinated individuals might. I think that is something that people need to recognize, that the vaccine is truly life-saving. It decreases the chance of death tremendously, decreases the chance of hospitalization tremendously, the chance of attaining the virus itself. These are things that go down dramatically, but obviously it's still possible. But in the states with higher vaccination numbers, you won't exactly see them care about COVID-19 as much. And unfortunately for Joe Biden, these are Democratic areas. So if you have Democratic resentment towards whoever's on the top of the ticket or whoever's at the helm of the Democratic Party, these Democrats are going to begin to turn on Joe Biden. Personally speaking, and I don't use anecdotal evidence as concrete forms, but I do want to say that I certainly have heard from people my age on my college campus or back home now that I'm here for Thanksgiving that they want the mask mandates to go away. They're talking about 94% vaccination rates on their campus or 70% vaccination rates in their county, and how it doesn't really make sense for them to have to wear a mask if people who are anti-vax or anti-COVID-19 or delegitimizers for the virus itself aren't going to be following the same precautions. What is the point of that? And thus, people will turn on those who are trying to impose that everyone wears a mask, even though there's a subsection of the country that isn't vaccinated and doesn't care about COVID-19 that will not follow such protocols. Another thing that I think should be pointed out is that while there will be that Democratic resentment from those who are vaccinated, it also works the other way, against the Democratic Party. The states with the lower vaccination numbers are going to be most impacted by COVID-19, and consequently are going to look to someone to blame. You may not trust the vaccine, but you will still very much blame Joe Biden. Nobody wants to admit that they could have prevented what happens to their family or their grandma or their grandfather. For instance, if someone in their family dies to COVID-19, They're not going to say, oh, they should have gotten the vaccine. If they're anti-vax, they truly believe that this vaccination is going to put a chip in their arm, or this vaccination is going to make them infertile. These are things that we hear, which are very clearly wrong in conspiracy theories. But again, they are not going to self-reflect and say, I was wrong. I should have told her to get vaccinated. Instead, they are going to turn on Joe Biden. They are going to say, you promised us you would get this under control. You said this would be safe for America, vaccinated or not. Altogether, you are promising a better America, and consequently, it didn't happen. And then you end up starting to see how the resentment forms not only in the blue states, but also in the red states. There is no way that Joe Biden wins by the surge of COVID-19, except for maybe in some reality, maybe this one, with mail-in ballots. But even then, it no longer negatively reflects on President Trump as it did at one point in time. So if you're taking a look at the vaccination numbers, this is another point too. I mean, we're going to wrap up on this one, but the point is that when you take a look at the map of the states with vaccination rates where everyone is fully vaccinated, I believe 60% or above, you can actually start to see that the 2016 election results nearly come in with full accuracy. I mean, you will literally see this map nearly, and I say nearly because there are two exceptions, Florida and Nevada, that are going in opposite directions from how they actually voted. But you can see here how the map nearly correlates to a T, or connects to a T, with the way that the 2016 election went. If you were just to flip Florida red and Nevada blue, boom, you would have the 2016 election result between Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump. And this isn't a coincidence. The uncertainty pertaining to the vaccine is much higher in red states compared to blue states, and that makes sense, but it is an unfortunate reality. But no matter what side of the aisle you're on, you're the Democrats, you're the Republicans, or even those who are independents, someone is going to get annoyed with Joe Biden, and whether it's justifiable or not is not my call to make. But at the end of the day, those feelings are very valid when it comes down to general public sentiment, and they are going to blame him and going to come out in full force either against him or for somebody else in the midterm elections to push back on such things. And looking at this map, there are plenty of competitive elections in many of these states that are red and blue, which means that Democrats are going to be in for the fight of their lives if variants such as the Omicron strain or Delta continue to go across this nation and make COVID-19 worse than it was before when President Trump was still in office. So thank you guys so much for watching this video. Make sure to comment down suggestions below. Subscribe on the left if you haven't already, and check out the Instagram and Twitter. At the bottom left of the screen, there's also a Discord server for you to go ahead and join. On the screen, there's a video you can watch, and then a playlist for my 2022 election analysis videos. Again, thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you all tomorrow.